when you're spending so much time trying to sound like a particular voice, it causes a lot of anxiety, and you get this sort of sense that like you're not good enough. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of your kind of mental health journey out of this place of, as you mentioned, you had panic attacks, and clearly, you had anxiety. And then there was a record company that came and offered you $1 million signing bonus, and you turned them down. So like, first I want to talk about like how and why, and how did you go from someone who had issues of anxiety, but obviously it didn't prevent you from sounding like you and having the confidence in your own, your art.
As an artist, when you're a student, you should study your heroes, in my opinion. You should love somebody's writing so much. For me, writing, I studied Steinbeck and Nabokov and Dostoevsky and Chekhov and Bukowski and Anais Nin. And I would read the same sentence over and over and over and go, how did they do that? I never did learn grammar. I'm still really quite terrible at it, but I learned how to write correctly because I loved these writers, and I learned how to write 2-paragraph sentences because Nabokov does that, pages, that's one sentence. It didn't mean I was forever going to write like Nabokov. It just meant I wanted to learn how to master a certain style so that if I wanted to express myself, I had that. It's like being a painter. I wasn't always going to use blue, but I needed to learn all the colors to make what I wanted. And, just as a side note, when I did get discovered, and I remember talking to a real famous producer, and he goes, you sound too derivative. You sound like Joni Mitchell and you sound like Rickie Lee Jones. And thank God, I don't know what gave me the wherewithal, but I was like, of course I do. I'm 18 years old. Like I'm developing. And how dare somebody try to make me so self-conscious that I suddenly can't sing. I'm 18 years old. Now I'm known as one of like the most iconic idiosyncratic singers that there is. If I would have listened to him and let that get inside my head, oh my God. And so you just kind of have to, the things that make you passionately interested, you just have to trust they're going to be good for you. And I'm not the kind of person that's going to stop there. I'm not just going to try to be Joni Mitchell or whatever it is. But you have to really go deep on the people that make you passionate, because that means you're fascinated. It means your soul or your mind are trying to grapple with something that's like food to you, but that's like saying just because you learn salt means all you're going to eat is salt. That's just kind of preposterous. So that's kind of just like a side note on that. The anxiety, I moved out at 15. I knew that statistically kids like me end up repeating the cycle. I knew that statistically I should end up an addict or with an addict, or an abuser or in an abusive relationship. And I looked at this idea of nature versus nurture because I was an avid reader. And I had wondered if my pain, the word trauma, I don't know if it existed back then. It might have, but I didn't know it. But I wondered if like the abusive environment I was raised in altered my ability to understand or get to participate in my own nature. Was my nurture so course changing that I'd never get to know my nature? One of the things that made me think about it was a bunny that we had named Caramel. We raised it in the chicken coop because it was the only safe place. And it pecked food like a chicken. And it had a funny little waddle hop that was very chicken-like. And it would lay on the nests for the chickens and hatch eggs for them. This bunny thought it was a chicken. How would it not know? And I really scared me when I moved out, because I was like, what if I'm a bunny that thinks it's a chicken? How will I get to know my nature if my nurture was this extreme? And I looked back through my family, and I identified something I called emotional English. I was taught an emotional language, an emotional way of relating to the world. I was taught names for feelings that may not be the right names, by the way. And it was the language I was given, and it was generational. And I could definitely recognize, as much as I had a physical genetic inheritance, I had an emotional inheritance. And that it's the language I would speak. That's why my dad was an abused kid, swore he'd never be abusive. and then became abusive. You speak the language you're given until you learn a new language. And it's hard to learn a new language. You have to go to school and you have to practice it. And it's not real fun. That's just to learn a new language, a literal, like learn Spanish. How do you go learn a new emotional language? That was very daunting. And I didn't know how to move out at 15 and feel so hopeless that I couldn't learn a new emotional language. So that became my goal in life. I was like, well, that's what I'm solving for. My goal in life is to learn a new emotional language. My goal in life is to understand if my nurture was bad, how do I get in touch with my nature? And the image I had was like an orange. I know it sounds so silly, but I thought I was an orange peel. I never got too curious about what was inside the orange peel. And so my personality, the way my psyche formed, becomes this shell around you. But it isn't you. It's just kind of the ways you've begun to navigate the world. It forms your personality. Maybe I'm mistrustful. Is that really my nature, or was that my nurture? Those are interesting things to think about. I liked thinking about that. And so I began to develop strategies of how do I get under the skin and into what is my nature? And to do that, I started to suppose that my anxiety didn't mean something was wrong with me. My anxiety might mean that something was right with me. The same way that food poisoning means your body's working, right? It's throwing up because you ate bad fish. My body meant I must be participating. I must be consuming something that doesn't agree with me and it's making me sick. So I began to use my anxiety as my ally, as my best tool, as my neon sign going, pay attention. Something you're thinking, feeling, or doing doesn't agree with you. And so that led me on this sort of mission that has still been my life's mission. It's still what I find the most interesting thing. But when I became homeless, the anxiety, the panic attacks turned into agoraphobia. I was shoplifting a lot. I was very sick. And I had become a statistic. I was a homeless kid who was stealing. I was like, okay, I didn't accomplish my goal here. And that made me really double down on getting more specific and now finding ways of taking the ideas into practices and then keeping track of how those practices worked to see how they had an effect on my happiness. Basically, was I doing better? Was I feeling better? Was I stopping stealing? And so that was just the most transformative time. And I started to get happier. I stopped having agoraphobia. I mean, that was a miraculous thing for me to figure out how to do. I was able to notice panic attacks coming and create a practice that could divert one. So by the time a record label came along, was I willing to sacrifice that? Not the hell at all. I just started getting what I really wanted, which was happiness. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize you take my emotional baggage and God forbid I get famous. That's another statistic waiting to happen. And so for me to do my career, I had to make a really strict set of principles that I was willing to live my life by so that I believed I could participate in a music career without self-imploding.